In the heart of Milan, in the early 2000s, when the world was moving faster than ever, when technology was reshaping how people thought, spoke, and prayed, a young boy quietly carried a secret that no one could have imagined. He was only 3 years old when it began. His name was Carlo Acutis, a bright-eyed boy with curly brown hair, a love for soccer, pizza, and computers. To anyone who met him, he looked like any other child, curious, full of energy, and with that soft, unassuming warmth that made people feel seen. But inside Carlo's world, something extraordinary was unfolding. One afternoon, as his mother guided him through a church in Milan, more for art and history than devotion, Carlo stopped in his tracks. He stood before a painting of the Virgin Mary. And he would not move. Minutes passed. Then more. His mother, Antonia, tried to coax him away, but Carlo remained transfixed, as if something invisible was drawing him in, something she couldn't understand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the little boy turned to her and said softly, "She's beautiful, Mama." Antonia smiled awkwardly. To her, it was just a child's comment, maybe about the colors or the artist's skill. But Carlo's eyes told another story. He wasn't looking at paint or canvas. He was looking at someone. Over the next few months, strange things began to happen. Carlo would ask to visit churches, not playgrounds, not toy stores, not movie theaters, churches. Every time he entered one, he gravitated toward Mary's image, as though she were waiting for him there. He'd stand silently, sometimes smiling, sometimes in tears. At home, Antonia would find him staring out the window, whispering words she couldn't quite hear. And when she'd ask, "Carlo, who are you talking to?" he'd simply answer, "A lady from heaven." Antonia laughed it off at first. Children have imaginary friends. But as time passed, the pattern deepened. The lady became a constant presence, not imaginary, not fleeting. When Carlo turned 4, he did something that startled his mother completely. He asked to go to Mass every single day. Antonia had grown up Catholic in name only, she rarely attended church, and her husband, Andrea, didn't see faith as anything more than tradition. But Carlo insisted, tugging her hand, begging until she gave in. That first morning Mass felt strange. The church was nearly empty, sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, casting colors on the floor. The priest's voice echoed softly. And there, beside her, Carlo knelt, hands folded, eyes closed, utterly still. Antonia felt something stir inside her. Something she hadn't felt since she was a little girl. As the years went by, the mystery only grew deeper. When Carlo was 7, he asked his mother a question that stopped her cold. "Mama, why do people act like Jesus doesn't exist?" Antonia froze. She didn't know what to say. She hadn't talked about faith at home. She hadn't taught him theology or catechism. And yet, here was her son, with a clarity of heart that defied reason. Carlo looked at her gently, as if he already knew her silence, and said, "She told me that most people forget. That's why she asked me to help." "She?" Antonia asked, confused. Carlo hesitated, then whispered, "I'll tell you when it's time." Those words would echo in her mind for years. From that moment, Carlo's life took on a rhythm that no one around him could fully understand. He became drawn to the Eucharist, the mystery of Jesus truly present in the consecrated bread and wine. Every morning, he'd attend Mass. Every afternoon, he'd spend hours in adoration, kneeling before the Blessed Sacrament in quiet prayer. He said the Eucharist was his highway to heaven. To his parents, it seemed intense, maybe even too much for a child. But Carlo wasn't solemn or withdrawn. He was joyful, witty, alive. He loved soccer, coding, movies, and friends. He'd laugh at jokes, play video games, and still find time to volunteer at soup kitchens and help classmates who were struggling. He was normal. And yet, something about him radiated peace. By the age of 11, Carlo had two seemingly opposite passions, God and technology. He could spend hours designing simple websites, learning HTML and JavaScript, things few adults understood then. His parents thought it was just another hobby. But Carlo saw something else, a tool. He once said to a friend, "The internet is like a knife. You can use it to cut bread or to hurt someone. It depends on how you use it." What his parents didn't realize, what no one realized, was that his love for the Eucharist and his gift for computers were not two separate things. They were connected. Because one night, in the quiet of his room, as he prayed before his crucifix, Mary appeared again. This time, her message was clear. She told Carlo that the world was forgetting the true presence of her Son in the Eucharist, that faith was fading, that people were treating the sacred as ordinary. She asked him to help remind them. And she gave him a mission. A mission that would require both his devotion and his computer skills. She said, "Gather every miracle that proves my Son is alive in the Eucharist. Let the world see what they have forgotten." At 12 years old, Carlo began a project that no one had ever attempted before. He researched Eucharistic miracles, documented instances where the consecrated host had physically transformed into human flesh, or bled, or remained preserved for centuries without decay. He studied church archives, medical reports, Vatican files. He spent months organizing the information, scanning photographs, translating documents. When his mother would peek into his room late at night, she'd sometimes hear him whispering quietly, as though taking instructions from someone unseen. When she asked, "Who are you talking to, Carlo?" he'd smile and answer, "She's showing me which miracle to research next." For 3 years, Carlo worked on the website. He designed it from scratch, simple, elegant, full of faith. Each page documented a Eucharistic miracle, with dates, photos, church verification, and explanations that anyone, even a child, could understand. He called it a digital exhibition of the Eucharistic miracles of the world. He wanted to show people that the Eucharist wasn't a symbol. It was real. And through it all, Mary appeared again and again, encouraging, guiding, preparing. But she never told him why the timing was so urgent. Not until the autumn of 2006. Carlo was 15. He had just finished updating his website. One evening, he came home looking pale. He said he was tired, more tired than usual. His parents thought it was school stress. Maybe he'd been staying up too late coding. Days passed. The fatigue worsened. Doctors ran tests. And then came the diagnosis, acute leukemia. Aggressive. Fast-moving. They told his parents he might have a week to live. Antonia felt the world collapse around her. Her child, her miracle child, was dying. But Carlo didn't seem afraid. In fact, he was peaceful, almost radiant. When his mother entered his hospital room, she found him smiling. Sometimes even laughing softly, as if someone had told him something beautiful. "Mama," he said one evening, "Mary is here. She's explaining everything." Antonia felt tears rise. "What is she saying, Carlo? What is she telling you?" He looked at her tenderly and whispered, "She showed me what happens next. She showed me the boy in Brazil. She showed me the miracles. She said my life isn't ending, it's changing form." Antonia had no idea what he meant. A boy in Brazil? What miracles! But Carlo's eyes, those calm, steady eyes, were full of certainty. He said, "Mary told me that some people die young, not because their work is finished, but because their work must continue from heaven." Carlo would die just days later, October 12, 2006, the feast of Our Lady of Apparitions. His final words were whispered with peace. "I'm happy to die because I lived my life without wasting even a minute on things that displease God." But what Mary told him before that final breath, what she revealed about the years to come, would only be understood much later, when a boy thousands of miles away would experience a miracle that defied all science. And it would prove that Carlo's mission, Mary's mission, was only beginning. Carlo Acutis had taken his final breath on the feast of Our Lady of Apparitions, October 12, 2006. In Assisi, his body was laid to rest in silence. The small church filled with tears, prayers, and the soft echo of hymns that spoke of resurrection and hope. To his family, his death was an unbearable grief. But to heaven, it was only the beginning. Because somewhere far from Italy, in a city that Carlo had never seen, a new thread of his story was already being woven. A thread that would take 7 years to unfold. Thousands of miles away, in Campo Grande, Brazil, a woman named Luciana Vanna sat at her kitchen table one humid evening, staring at a glass of water her son couldn't drink. Her 4-year-old boy, Mateus, had been born with a rare pancreatic defect known as annular pancreas. Every time he ate or drank, his small body rejected it violently. He vomited constantly, lost weight, grew pale. Doctors had tried everything. Surgeries, medication, dietary experiments, nothing worked. Luciana's home had become a small hospital. Feeding tubes, prescription bottles, the quiet hum of medical machines. She prayed, but her prayers often ended in tears of exhaustion. She didn't know it then, but the name of her family, Vanna, was about to be written into one of the most extraordinary modern miracles in the history of the Church. One Sunday morning, Luciana dragged herself to church. She hadn't been in weeks. That day, the parish priest, Father Marcello Tenorio, spoke about a young Italian boy who had died years earlier, a boy whose cause for beatification was under investigation by the Vatican. His name, Carlo Acutis. Father Marcello described him as a teenager who loved video games and pizza, but loved the Eucharist even more. He spoke of how Carlo had built a website documenting Eucharistic miracles around the world. Luciana listened half distracted, but something about that boy's story stirred her. A teenager who used his computer to talk about God? Who called the Eucharist his highway to heaven? She couldn't explain why, but she felt something move inside her, a spark of hope she hadn't felt in years. After Mass, Luciana approached Father Marcello. "Father," she said, "can you tell me more about this boy?" He smiled and handed her a small laminated card with Carlo's picture on it, a young boy with brown curls, a gentle smile, eyes that seemed to hold both wisdom and innocence. "Pray to him," the priest said. "Ask for his intercession. He was close to the Virgin Mary. He might help you." Luciana nodded, holding the card as if it was something fragile. That night, she knelt beside her son's bed. Mateus was asleep, his breathing shallow, a small tube taped to his cheek. Luciana placed the card on his chest and whispered, "Carlo? I don't know who you are. But if you can hear me, please help my son." She didn't expect anything. She just needed to believe again. From that night onward, Luciana began praying every day, not to angels or saints in general, but directly to Carlo Acutis. She told him everything, her fears, her exhaustion, her love for her boy. And as days passed, something strange began to happen. She felt accompanied. She couldn't explain it, a calmness during the night, a warmth during her prayers. Sometimes, when she prayed, she sensed someone beside her. A woman. A presence that radiated gentleness and comfort, the same feeling she'd once had as a child when she prayed the rosary with her grandmother. Luciana later said, "I couldn't see her, but I knew it was the Virgin Mary." Months turned into years. Matthäus remained frail. But Luciana kept praying, sometimes through tears, sometimes in silence. Then, in October 2013, something unexpected happened. Father Marcello announced that he had received a relic of Carlo Acutis, a small piece of cloth that had touched the young boy's body after his death. He invited the parish to attend a blessing service on October 12, the same day Carlo had died 7 years earlier. Luciana felt an unmistakable pull. She didn't know why that date mattered. But something in her heart told her, go. That evening, the church was dimly lit. Candles flickered along the altar. The air was thick with incense and prayer. Luciana carried Matthäus in her arms. He was frail, light, but alive. When it came time for the blessing, Father Marcello held out the relic. One by one, people came forward, touching it, whispering their intentions. When Luciana and her son reached the front, she knelt. She pressed the relic gently against Matthäus's small stomach. "Carlo," she prayed, "please help my son eat again." And in that moment, just as the relic touched his skin, Matthäus opened his eyes and said, with childlike simplicity, "Mom, I don't want to throw up anymore." At first, Luciana thought it was just a sweet moment, a child's innocent wish. But when they returned home that night, Matthäus asked for food. Luciana hesitated. Every motherly instinct screamed no, because every time he had tried to eat before, it had ended in agony. But something inside whispered, "Trust." She handed him a small piece of bread. He ate it. He smiled. And then, nothing happened. No vomiting. No pain. The next morning, he ate again. A full breakfast. For the first time in his 4 years of life, Matthäus ate, and kept it down. Luciana wept. She called Father Marcello, shouting, "Father! He's eating! He's eating!" The priest rushed to their home. He saw the child, sitting upright, laughing, holding a plate of rice and beans. There was no doubt something miraculous had occurred. The doctors confirmed it days later. They ran scans, blood work, tests. The defect, the annular pancreas that had wrapped around Matthäus's intestine, was completely gone. No trace. No scar. No medical explanation. The healing was instantaneous, complete, and permanent. When the Vatican began investigating, they gathered every medical report, every X-ray, every testimony. Independent specialists examined the case. There was no surgery, no medicine, no possible natural cause. And so, after years of scrutiny, the Church officially declared it a miracle through the intercession of Carlo Acutis. It became the miracle that would pave the way for his beatification. But what few people knew was that this wasn't just Carlo's miracle. It was Mary's. Because when Luciana later shared her testimony, she said something that astonished investigators. She said, "While I was praying to Carlo, I always felt that I wasn't alone. I felt a woman's presence, gentle, motherly. I knew it was the Virgin Mary." Mary had been there, guiding Luciana's prayers, preparing her heart, and using Carlo as her instrument. It was the same pattern heaven had used throughout Carlo's life, Mary working through him to reach others. Even in death, their partnership had not ended. In 2020, when the miracle was officially recognized, the Vatican announced that Carlo Acutis would be beatified. he was declared Blessed Carlo Acutis, one step away from sainthood. The boy who loved pizza and coding was now honored by millions around the world as the first millennial to be beatified by the Catholic Church. Pope Francis himself praised Carlo's example, saying, "He showed that holiness is possible for the young, that the internet can be a tool for good, and that faith can live fully in the modern world." Thousands came to Assisi to venerate his relics. When they opened his tomb, his body was found incorrupt, astonishingly preserved, as though he were simply sleeping. His sneakers still clean. His face serene. It was as if heaven was saying, "He's not gone. He's with me." And yet, there was one more secret, something still hidden in Carlo's story. Because as investigators reviewed his writings, they found journals, small notebooks he had filled during his final weeks in the hospital. Inside those pages was the one conversation he had never shared with anyone. A final message from the Virgin Mary, the truth about why she had chosen him. He wrote, "Mary told me that I was not chosen because I am holy, but because I am ordinary. She said she needed someone who lives like everyone else, so that people would see that holiness is possible anywhere." Carlo had finally revealed the purpose of his encounters. Mary hadn't chosen him for his perfection, but for his availability. She told him that the 21st century would be an age of noise, of distraction, disbelief, and technology. But through that same technology, light could also spread. She needed someone who would show young people that the internet wasn't the enemy of faith, it could become its ally. And she needed someone who wouldn't hide holiness behind walls of tradition, but carry it into the modern world. That was Carlo's mission. That was Mary's plan. When you look at it this way, the miracle in Brazil wasn't just proof of Carlo's intercession. It was proof that heaven's message was alive, that Mary was still at work through her children. That her love doesn't fade when someone dies, it multiplies. Luciana would later say that after her son's healing, her home changed. The peace that had once filled Carlo's hospital room, that same sense of invisible comfort, seemed to fill their house too. Every night, when Mateus prayed before bed, he'd say, "Thank you, Carlo. Thank you, Mother Mary." 7 years. 7 years between Carlo's death and the miracle. 7 years between sorrow and proof. The number of completion. The number of divine perfection. It was almost as though heaven had timed it perfectly, to remind the world that life, death, and eternity are not separate stories. They are one continuous conversation between God and His creation. But the story doesn't end with beatification. Because just recently, in 2025, the Church uncovered Carlo's final writings, the ones that reveal the ultimate secret Mary told him before he died. A truth not only about him, but about us. What she said will change the way you see your own life, your own struggles, and the quiet ways heaven might already be speaking to you. After his beatification, Carlo Acutis' story traveled farther than he ever did in life. Across cathedrals and classrooms, across YouTube and smartphones, his face, that gentle, modern saint's face, began to appear everywhere. But hidden beneath the celebrations, beneath the images and prayers, there was still one unanswered question. What exactly did the Virgin Mary tell him before he died? When Vatican archivists began sorting through Carlo's journals, those fragile notebooks he'd kept during his final weeks, they found notes written in his familiar handwriting. Simple. Neat. But beneath the simplicity lay something deeper, messages that felt less like thoughts and more like dictation. Words that seemed spoken through him. On the top of one page, he had written a title. The Conversation in the Light. What followed was a dialogue. A conversation between a boy on his hospital bed and the woman who had been appearing to him in dreams and prayer, the Virgin Mary. It began with a question from Carlo. "Mother, Why do you come to me? There are so many holier people than me. And the answer, written as if whispered gently into his heart, was this: because holiness is not about greatness. It is about readiness. You were ready to listen when others were busy speaking. Mary had chosen Carlo not because he was extraordinary, but because he was ordinary and willing. In a world of noise, he had learned to be silent. In a culture obsessed with success, he had learned to serve quietly. He had discovered what Mary called the divine rhythm of the ordinary. She told him, every act of love, every small kindness done in silence, is a note in heaven's song. You live not to be seen, but to become light. Carlo wrote that these words burned into him like fire. He realized that holiness isn't about escaping the modern world, it's about transforming it from within. And that technology, the internet, the glowing screens of our age, could either blind us or become windows through which light could shine. Mary told him, where people scroll endlessly, you will plant seeds. Where they seek distraction, you will reveal devotion. That was why he had built his website documenting Eucharistic miracles. It wasn't just curiosity, it was prophecy. He was laying digital foundations for faith in a time when churches would be silent, when screens would become altars. And years later, during the pandemic, millions of people indeed discovered the Eucharist online, through Carlo's archived website. It was as though he had prepared the world in advance. But Mary's message to him went even deeper. She told him about the coming silence, an age when the world would be louder than ever, yet emptier than it had ever been. She said, the enemy of your generation will not come with swords or flames, but with distraction. He will steal the silence where God speaks. That struck Carlo deeply. He began fasting from the internet for short periods, even though he used it for good. He said to his friends, the more Eucharist we receive, the more we become like Jesus, and the more we must let go of the things that steal our attention from him. It was Mary's training. She was teaching him how to walk through the noise and still hear heaven. Then came the final entry, the one written just 2 days before he died. Carlo wrote, Mary came again. She told me that soon I will come home. She said that when I see her, I will recognize her not as a queen on a throne, but as a mother I have always known. She said that when people speak of me, they should not look for the miraculous in my death, but in how I lived. That I must remind them that every Eucharist is a miracle, every prayer a meeting with heaven. And then he added one final line, shaky handwriting, as though written through pain. She said, tell them that holiness is not far. It begins where love becomes routine. Those were his last written words. Years later, when pilgrims visit Carlo's tomb in Assisi, they often notice something unusual. Around the glass coffin that holds his incorrupt body, there are not just flowers, but phones laid there by young people. Teenagers, programmers, students. They come not just to pray, but to promise, to use what they have, as he did, for love, for truth, for God. It's strange and beautiful to see modern tools, once symbols of distraction, become instruments of devotion. And if you listen closely in that chapel, you might notice something else. A quiet, a profound, living silence. It's the kind of silence that Mary spoke about, the silence where God still speaks, if only we're willing to listen. When Pope Francis was told about Carlo's final writings, he said during a homily, "The Blessed Virgin always chooses those who make room for God in the ordinary." Carlo teaches us that holiness is not beyond the reach of the modern world, it is within the reach of a click, a choice, a prayer. Let's go back, for a moment, to Luciana and her son in Brazil. Mateus is now a healthy young man. He plays soccer, eats freely, studies computer science, inspired by Carlo. He keeps a small photo of Carlo beside his computer. When asked by a reporter what he remembers, he said, "I don't remember the sickness. I remember peace. I remember light. When I was healed, I saw a woman smiling at me. I think it was Mary." That was the hidden pattern again, Mary working through Carlo, through the ordinary, through love. It's easy to see miracles as rare, spectacular events. But in Carlo's story, every miracle begins with something small, a prayer, a mother's faith, a boy's curiosity. He proved that heaven often enters the world not through thunder, but through whisper. Because that's the heart of the secret of the ordinary. That God hides glory in routine. That heaven disguises its wonders as simple days. That holiness begins not when we leave the world, but when we love it rightly. Carlo once said, "All people are born as originals, but many die as photocopies." That was his warning, and his invitation. To live as your own original, to reflect the image of God uniquely, fearlessly, joyfully. That is the legacy of Mary's apparition to him, not a spectacle to be admired, but a lifestyle to be lived. Imagine this. The Virgin Mary appears not just to one boy, but through his life to millions, showing that the sacred can live in the ordinary. When she looked at Carlo, she saw every one of us who struggles to pray, who scrolls instead of kneeling, who feels unworthy but still desires heaven. Her message through Carlo is this: do not think holiness is beyond you. You are already standing on holy ground. Every click, every breath, every quiet choice for love, that is your offering. She calls each of us by the same words she said to him. Be the light of the ordinary. That's the real miracle, not that a boy in Italy saw the Virgin Mary, but that his life became a bridge between heaven and a digital world. He showed that sanctity doesn't need to wear robes or hold candles, sometimes it wears sneakers and carries a laptop. And that, in the hands of faith, even code and pixels can become prayers. When the world feels lost in noise, remember Carlo's secret. Silence is not emptiness. It is the room where God speaks. And every act of love, however small, is a light in that silence. So tonight, wherever you are, whether your altar is a church pew or a quiet corner of your room, pause for a moment. Turn off the noise. Look up. And whisper, as Carlo once did. Mary, make me ready. Blessed Carlo Acutis, pray for us. O Mary, Mother of the Eucharist, make our ordinary days holy.